What's the most ridiculous thing you've bullshitted someone into believing? In my freshman year of college I convinced a shitload of people that I was paying my way through college with residual checks from my time as an original Kids Bop kid. It is such a far-fetched thing to lie about it. It's perfect. I once worked with a couple who liked the idea of going to Everest, but really didn't fancy the effort of the huge trek to get there. I told them it was a lot easier now that a huge series of chairlifts had just been installed which went all the way to base camp. One Monday morning they arrived at the office and had a pop at me because they'd been to a travel agency to book a trip and the travel agent had promptly laughed at them. This was a few weeks ago. I was discussing with my coworker how scientists recently discovered a new dinosaur species. They found tons and tons of female fossils, but none male. So scientists figured that it might be the earliest evidence of lesbianism in the animal kingdom. She was like, how can they tell it is female from a fossil? And I told her it had to do with certain bones that are found only in the vajayjaya area and the lack of certain bones that are found around the Venus area. She was fascinated. It went on for about 20 minutes until I told her they named the species Lickalotopus. As a Welsh person, I have a story about sheep. I once managed to convince my non-Welsh friends that Welsh sheep know how to use pedestrian crossings. They didn't believe me, but I kept at it, and eventually they started to come round. Months later, we were doing a pub crawl in the valleys when we suddenly saw a gang of sheep standing by some traffic lights, looking gormless in a way only sheep and guinea pigs can do. We stopped for a moment, wondering what was about to happen, when suddenly the pedestrian crossing light turned green and the sheep trotted slowly and carefully across the road. My friends, bloody hell Hoodman, I thought you were kidding. Me, jaw hitting the floor. Me, jaw hitting the floor. Must have been a good looking sheep. There is a girl I work with who is extremely gullible and pretty much believes anything that sounds even sort of plausible. So me and my roommate, who also worked there, would come up with lots of vaguely believable things to tell her. Things we successfully convinced her of. That North Dakota is the highest elevated point in North America, and as a result the moon appears 20% larger in that state. Most of North Dakota's money comes from their moon viewing tourism industry. The name Manul is Spanish for badger. We work at a Tim Hortons, so every once in a while she would hand someone a badger and say here is your Manul. That we shouldn't use the word chisel because it's a racial slur against mixed race African nations. That my roommate was feral as a child 6 months after being lost in the woods, and that his speech impediment was a result of the language delays that feral children acquire. When my children were all much smaller, I convinced them that it was illegal to supply balloons to minors. I have PTSD and the sound of the balloons popping was terrifying to me, and I didn't want to deal with it. So I told them that they were illegal. It worked quite well, except when we'd be in restaurants and an innocent waitress would sweetly say to them, "Do you want a balloon?" And one of them would say, "Do you want to go to prison?" I'm 6. Little kids are so much fun to troll. I was cooking once, and my little sister kept stealing the bell peppers I was cutting up. She was like 3 at the time and still believed most of what I said, so I cut up some onions and asked her if she wanted to try white bell peppers. She still remembers this event 3 years later now and doesn't trust me when I give her some food she doesn't know. Haha. My other greatest hits include the ice cream truck plays music to let us know when it's out of ice cream and a white dot that only mommies can see appears on your head when you drink soda without asking. When my daughter would take soda, she would walk around with her hand over her forehead, so it was easy to tell. They're all older now and amazingly seem to not have been traumatized by these and the many other lives that I told to survive parenting 6 closely spaced kids. I used to ask my mom if I would get eyes in the back of my head soon or if I'd have to wait until I became a mother. I've been a mom for almost a year and a half and I'm still waiting. My friend asked me how to say duck you in Vietnamese. I instead taught him to say I eat shut. He spent the day telling all the Vietnamese people in our school that he eats shut. People were too stunned to say anything, so he made it through the day without anyone spoiling it. Either way, he still wanted to tell everyone duck you all day, so he totally deserved it. Preemptive karma. My mate had a dumb, annoying 20-something-year-old girlfriend. He also doesn't eat onion. One night we tricked her into thinking that when he was growing up he had an imaginary friend called Freddy, and that Freddy was an onion, and that's why he didn't eat onions. We said our friend was very self-conscious and emotional about it and didn't talk about it. Days later she said to him, "It's okay, I know about Freddy." He had no ducking idea what she was talking about. She totally believed it. I convinced my kids that the Colonel Sanders head on the KFC sign is a guy called Kentucky, and that's why it's called Kentucky Fried Chicken. My cousins and I were in a Ben & Jerry's once and there was a picture on the wall of Ben, Jerry, and this little Asian dude in between them. Just some fan, I'm sure. So, my younger cousin asked who the other guy was, and his brother said, "That's Sam." All the younger cousins believed him. That's a believable Asian name. Source: Asian. I told my mom that there's no internet on Christmas Day because it's a public holiday. She spent the past 5 Christmases without the internet and I just don't have the heart to tell her I was joking. Update: she still hasn't realized. You are in too deep now. Better just tell her they changed the rules, much like all the retail stores have started staying open on Thanksgiving. When me and my siblings were much younger, my dad owned a Volvo car with a computerized voice. It was a very deep voice that would give you warnings about the car's status. The boot trunk is not shut, being one I remember. Very creepy now I look back at it. Me, my older brother and our dad would joke that the voice came from a little man inside the car. My younger sister was at an age where you could tell her anything and she would take it as gospel. She actually believed there was a tiny person with an extraordinarily deep voice living in the car. We kept it going for a long time until one day someone crashed into the vehicle and it ended up in the scrapyard. As she cried for the safety of the little man, we had to tell her the truth. She was mad at us for weeks. I convinced my kids that my car's triangular red hazard button was a self-destruct button. This was initially to keep them from hitting it, since it is a really prominently placed, large red button. This worked out great, until I quickly pulled the car over the other day to get a dog off the road, threw on my hazards, and jumped out of the car after the dog. I looked back, and both kids are hitting the ditch. Dealing with that kind of betrayal must have been hard for them. Dad hit the self-destruct and ran away. Dad killed a dog, hit self-destruct on the car to remove all evidence and witnesses and ran away. Shut. When I was in high school, our band marched in the Independence Day parade in DC. This would have been late 80s. While getting ready, a lady from Ohio came up to us, intrigued by our southern accents, rural town and AL. She started talking slowly to us, and it kind of hacked me off. I started into a story about how poor we all were, that my dad was a grit farmer and times were especially tough, since the Norse had ruined the crop. Small critter, like a beaver, takes 10 to 15 to cover a las boy, so my daddy had taken to running moonshine up to TN just to make ends meet. I ended my story telling her our band had to have 27 bake sales just to get shoes for everyone. I did not think she was believing me until her eyes started watering and she commended us for our dedication and hoped we liked the big city. In year 8, I convinced a girl that the term Jew referred to famous black people. To her, this meant that everyone from Obama to Oprah were Jews. Will Smith, Jew. Nelson Mandela, Jew. Samuel L. Jackson, Jew. This spins an odd light onto the Second World War. My buddy convinced a girl that bears lay eggs and she would state it as fact until she was almost out of high school. Stay at home dad here. There's a type of ice cream I like called Bear Tracks. It has little chocolate candies in it filled with either caramel or peanut butter. I used to tell my boys that those were real bear turds and that the guys that collected them had the most dangerous job in America. In high school, a friend and I once convinced an acquaintance that a wonton was a small furry animal that lived in the back of Chinese restaurant. To make the soup, these animals were boiled and skinned before being tossed into the soup. This kid not only believed us, but went up to the teacher and told him of his newly learned fact. That teacher's face contained the most pure look of disappointment I have ever seen. Me and a friend convinced a lot of people we were twins, but with different mother. Hey, my friend and I did that too. The best part was he's half Asian and I'm white. I used to tell my brother I was working for a spy organization and that if he wanted to join in, he would have to complete simple tasks without alerting our parents, such as making me a sandwich while I played the Sega Genesis. My brother convinced me to be his maid when I was like 5. He would make me clean up his messes, then I paid him. I was not a smart kid. My mum told me that when I was in primary school I managed to convince the teacher that I couldn't do homework as I was busy helping on the farm I lived on. At the time my mother asked if I ever had any homework to do, I'd tell her no. I got found out at the parents' evening at the end of the year when my teacher asked my mum if I would have any free time to do homework next term. One December when we were in elementary school, my little brother asked my parents when we would be getting our Christmas tree this year. They, clearly jokingly, said sorry son, we just can't afford one this year. They said they spent all the money on his presents or something like that. Clearly laughing and joking. Well, my brother went to school and started telling people we couldn't afford a Christmas tree. He told his teacher who told the other teachers. I get pulled from my own classroom and my teacher takes me to the hall to tell me that she heard about us not being able to afford a tree and that the teachers are going to help us by doing a little fundraiser or something. And I was like, no, we are fine, really, we can afford a tree. And she was like, you don't need to be ashamed, it's okay. No, I swear. We are fine. We really are. You don't need to lie to me, it's okay, we can help. I ended up eventually convincing her that it was just my brother being a dumb kid and we really were absolutely fine. TLDR, my parents made a quick one-off joke that we couldn't afford a Christmas tree that year. My brother told everyone at school. The school tried to do a fundraiser so we could buy a tree. This reminds me of when my dad was trying to get rid of a load of loose change when buying some cinema tickets and the old lady behind us offered to pay for the rest. I was so embarrassed. I had 2 Facebook accounts under different names. Most other stuff was similar. So I have a friend on the Facebook under my name, discover my other one, and he sent a friend request to it, which I accepted. I then set forth and convinced him that I actually was 2 different people who just happened to look identical and worked in the same place and on the odd occasion went on vacation together. Dumbest person I know in real life. Coca-Cola paid over $500,000 for the red stripe on McDonald's straws. That's one of those things that sounds stupid, but yet could be true. You know how there's those silly dumb laws, like in Oregon, ice cream may not be eaten on Sundays, or in Texas, it is illegal for one to shoot a buffalo from the 2nd story of a hotel. When we were visiting Peel Harbor, my dad convinced me that there was a dumb law on the books that said on the grounds of the US Arizona War Memorial, the United States shall officially remain at war with the Empire of Japan. He pointed at a bunch of Japanese tourists and said that, technically, we were still allowed to kill them as long as both us and the Japanese people were actually within the memorial. He went on to say, of course, it would be a terrible thing to do and nobody wants you to do it. I'm just saying, if you pushed one of them into the water, the only thing they could charge you with is littering. Then my stepmother whacked him in the back of the head and said, shut up, he's going to actually do it. Which I found very offensive, because obviously I'm not just raring to murder strangers, restrained only by the law. I once convinced the Midwestern girl I was dating that in my country we all drop to an E and jazz hands at the end of the Nigerian national anthem. In high school my girlfriend drove a Miata. Sometimes she let me drive it to school. I'm stepping out of it, and a classmate with an excited look and wide eyes says, sweet car. I've never seen anything like it before. What is it? Even though it says Mazda right on the back, I decided to mess with him because I'm a duck and told him it was a special edition Japanese Ferrari and that it was extremely rare. He wasn't convinced, so I decided to see how long I could drag it out and began showing him pictures of old Ferrari Roadsters and told him the Miata I was driving was the final, more modern evolution. As far as I know he still thinks Miatas are made by Ferrari.